there was this whole slew of articles that I started seeing pop off all over the place about, reasoning models don't always say what they think. The AI is lying to us. I mean, you can pretty much think of nefarious AI as deceiving executives everywhere. I mean, if you just want a clickbait article, there's no shortage of them. And a lot of it is coming off of some Anthropic research that recently came out. Okay. And so I wanted to talk about what that Anthropic research says, what it means, what it looks like, all this stuff, because ultimately it's important to understand what it is, because it is what it seems, but it's also not quite. Now, if you want to go actually look at the research, it's 18 pages. It's fairly consumable, but it's called Reasoning Models Don't Always Say What They Think. Okay, so the title of the research itself is rather clickbaity in and of itself, but it came out of Anthropic. And if you want to go dig into all the specifics and the details and how they ran the tests and all this other stuff, you can go look at all that stuff. My goal is to break down some of the biggest highlights of it to help you understand what this all means and to see what some of these takeaways are and how we should be thinking about this. Because what I can tell you is my take on what we're seeing here is we're not going to fix this. So if the goal is how do we correct this, we don't, in my opinion. Now, there might be people who think we will. I will vehemently argue against them at any point. I don't think we will. So it's more a matter of, okay, if this is what AI does and how it operates, then how do we work alongside it knowing these things? Now, I think it's really important that I'm going to break down some terminology that I'm going to use so that you understand. And if you were to go look at the research, you'd understand what it's talking about. So let me just do a little bit of like education context setting first. A lot of what it's talking about is its COT, or its chain of thought. Now, you may have seen this if you use AI models, but when you ask it to do things, certain models, or if you put it in a certain mode, it will actually show you what looks like high-speed credits that if you were to go back and look at it, you would see like this is its reasoning. This is its thinking if you were to translate its thinking on demand. And it's an effort to undo the black box, to remove the curtain from the black box and help us peer into the AI model and see how it thinks. So when you hear things like chain of thought monitoring, COT, things like that in the AI space, just understand that's what they're referring to. This transparent reasoning that's supposed to be explainable AI, XAI type of a thing that helps you understand what the AI is doing. Okay. So that's one term that you're going to hear a lot. Now, something else that comes up in this research a lot is its reinforcement learning methodology. So does it use a human feedback methodology? I can't remember the exact term for it. It's like RLHF. If you see RLHF, reinforcement learning, human feedback. This is the traditional approach that a lot of AI is trained on. You have to remember, AI doesn't just, yes, it does reinforcement learning and all this stuff, but there is a human assessment that helps then reinforce it. And one of the ways it often is done is humans tell it, yeah, I like what you gave me, what you return. And you see this even in the old models that you do yourself. If you go type something into ChatGPT or whatever model, sometimes you'll see it'll give you two different versions and it'll say, which one do you prefer? Or down at the bottom of each one, it'll give you a little thumbs up, like, was that a good response type of a thing. Now that's post the model being trained, but that same kind of process happens when they're actually training the models. And so there's two big ways of doing that. One is the human feedback reinforcement. One is outcome based, where it's just, did you get to the right answer? We don't really care how you got there. Human feedback is looking more throughout, did I like what you did? Did I like the way you went through it? We're evaluating all those things. So you're going to see it talk about some of those things. And then another term that I say a lot, or I see, thrown around a lot, that a lot of people are like, they nod, but they don't really know what it's talking about. You'll hear the term reward hacking. And what that means is when the AI finds a way to cheat the system. A good example of this would be like, let's say you tell it to do something, but somehow there's an unencrypted file that actually has the solution to what it is. And it figures out, well, if I just do this, I get the right answer all the time anyway, and you can basically hack the system. That's reward hacking. And a good example, I think I talked about this months ago, was a video game where a boat, was supposed to drive itself around, and it found out that if it actually glitched through this thing, it could do it a lot faster. And so it just started doing that all the time because it went, well, this is actually getting me the same reward, but I don't have to skip all these steps, right? It's like cheating in some ways. So that's what reward hacking is. So if you go look at the report, you're going to see those terms thrown around a lot. And this is what it's getting into when it says you can't trust it. It doesn't always say what it thinks. Well, what they're really talking about is this chain of thought, this reasoning that it's supposed to be supposedly telling you how it thinks. And when they dug into it, the accuracy of it was extremely poor, like less than 20%. I mean, there's a bunch of different mentions of it, but let's just say it's not in the high end of things. So as you can imagine, you can now see why it's not always saying accurately how they think. Well, yeah, the data proves that. So if you were to actually try and understand how did you come to that conclusion, and you were to look at the chain of thought, it wouldn't be improved. Like, it wouldn't actually be there. Now, that's extremely problematic when you start to think about, okay, well, if we're starting to move towards handing over AI more and more and more of our decisions, and we now have to audit it, we now have to understand, well, why did it draw the conclusion it did? If less than 20% of the time, the reasons that it's giving us are not accurate, well, that suddenly becomes majorly problematic for anything that requires any sort of audit trail, requires any sort of follow-up. If something breaks and you want to go back and actually try and understand, well, wait, how did you come to that conclusion? You're not really going to be able to figure it out because it's not going to be accurate. And where it gets compounds is the human feedback approach, which is often how AI models are trained versus just the outcome-based, is actually even more problematic, which at first glance you would go, that doesn't make any sense. If you have humans sitting here giving it feedback all the time, wouldn't its reasoning be better? Wouldn't it be more accurate in what it does than if you just say, just get to the goal, I don't care how you do it, just get there? Actually, no. And as you dug into some of this stuff, one of the things that was really interesting about why, and it actually makes sense, is that we like to think we're objective and unbiased, and we see things clearly, but we don't. And so when AI is actually trained on us saying, this is what good looks like, thumbs up, thumbs down, no, I don't like it that way, it actually learns, and I've said this multiple times in the past, it actually almost learns how to tell you what you want to hear rather than the truth, because it just is continually being reinforced by this human feedback learning that, oh, people like this, people like that, they want to hear this, they like it phrased this way. So what you'll see in these, and they saw this in the research, was some of these human feedback trained models and environments, it gave much more impressive answers. If you were to read, well, but now how did you come to that conclusion? Or you were to look at the reasoning, it would seem very well polished. It would be very, you would just be like, wow, that looks good to me. I'm going to take that for what it is, except it's not right. It's not accurate, because ultimately that's not what people want. People don't want the messy, real answers. They want what makes them feel better about things. Now, again, you can kind of see, well, that's kind of problematic, because if we're supposed to have humans in the loop, but we also are finding that human reinforced AI is actually worse in terms of being more deceptive and more incomplete in explaining its reasoning, isn't human in the loop a bad thing? No. Just to be crystal clear on this. Now, going, back to the other one where it's like, oh, outcome-based was so much better, right? So if we just said, just go do it, don't care how you get there, do it, it actually was better at explaining its reasoning. Well, that created two problems. One, it just did what it needed to do. But then two, it capped out. Okay. And it also was not just like, whoa, it's 99% accurate in explaining its chain of thought when we do outcome-based reinforcement versus 20% with human feedback reinforcement. It actually wasn't really all that great. There's like 28% at best. So you're seeing, I mean, a notable margin of difference between outcome-based and human feedback reinforcement, but not so much so that you would go, okay, throw the human feedback out. It's just not even worth it. I think what it speaks to is we have to be really conscientious and careful about assuming that, and I have to be careful how I represent this because I say this all the time. I talk about the fact it's important to have humans in the loop. What we have to be really, really careful about, and I think this research reveals this, is that simply putting a human in the loop does not improve the outcome. And we're seeing this in the research of just because you have humans reinforce the learning actually can have negative side effects. It actually can make it worse in explaining its reasoning because it just knows what you want to say. So one, those humans actually have to have clear guardrails and guidance in, well, how do you assess this? Don't just do it off your gut tummy feels. Yeah, that looks like a much better response to me. I feel good about that. No, you actually have to have rigid criteria that people are weighing it against, type of thing. And also, we need to be careful we don't become over reliant on, so any sort of human in the loop, any sort of human feedback naturally is better than not having it. That's actually not true. But we also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think was really my takeaway from this. Now, something else I thought was really interesting in the reward hacking, which if you remember, I talked about what reward hacking was where it would find some sort of exploit in accomplishing its task, which I was going to include it this week, but I didn't. This thing about how AI is like doing some crazy stuff to accomplish its tasks. One of the things that was really interesting is when it does that, when it identifies an exploit, it almost never includes that in its chain of thought. Almost never, less than 2% of the cases in this research. So if it found a cheat, regardless of what that cheat was or how it pulled it off or how it found it, it basically never said it did that. And even when questioned, it didn't. Yet it would find the exploits every time, like 99% of the time. Now, I share this because it just helps you understand how to think about why we need to be so careful with this. 99% of the time, AI will find exploits and hacks to accomplish its task. If there is one, because again, this thing moves so fast, it's so good at pattern recognition, it's so good at figuring out what it needs to do, that it will find, if there's a faster way to do it, a quicker, easier way to do it, it will do it. And it will not tell you it's going to do it. So what do we take from that is, well, one, I mean, I think there's opportunity for us to try and figure out how we do that one. We might have to try and figure out how do we get better at that. I don't know that we can, because again, we're dealing with an AI system that's built on human data, that's made by human people. I mean, humans do this all the time. I've just been in the human performance business long enough to know when people figure out a cheat to the system, it doesn't matter what you do. For the most part, getting it out of them that they're doing it is like pulling teeth. It's very difficult. So is it any surprise? And that's where when people go, oh, AI is so bad. People are the same way. If they find an exploit and they're using an exploit, chances are they're not going to tell you they're using an exploit. They're not going to tell you they found a shortcut, regardless of, even if you ask them directly. So AI, naturally, you would expect is going to do the same thing. The difference is humans are a lot worse at finding these exploits. AI will find them. And this goes back to why going slow to go fast is so important with AI, because if there is a way it can do a better job, better, air quote, accomplish its task more efficiently, more effectively, faster, whatever that reward system is, whatever you're telling it, this is the goal I'm trying to get to. If there's a way it can find a loophole to get that done, it will find it, almost guaranteed. And then it will not tell you that that's what it's doing. So, again, this is why we need to think through, okay, one, AI can't really be held accountable. So where exactly are you putting AI into your systems? How are you doing it? How are you overseeing it? How are you making sure there are people in place to be held accountable for what it does? How are you keeping people in at key decision points? Because maybe you won't ever be able to truly understand. I actually don't think we will. To be completely honest, I don't think we're ever going to be able to grasp how AI came to the conclusions that it did. And in some ways, I don't think that's necessarily always a bad thing if we're very careful about what we delegate to it. Okay, I think about that as a people manager. One of the things that I found to be so effective as a people manager is I take the time to get really clear on the outcomes and the parameters of whatever you do, you cannot go outside of these boundary lines. However, within those boundary lines, I'm not going to get in your way. And believe me when I tell you, that will unlock human performance like you've never seen. I think we're going to have to take the same approach to AI. We are going to have to take the time to get crystal clear on what our desired outcome is, crystal clear on, hey, what are the absolute, like we cannot bend around these parameters. There can be no exceptions to this in this area, which all goes back to why you have to have some sort of moral, ethical framework that you build into this stuff. And then from there, we need to be okay saying, AI, do your thing. And then trusting it to do it. And yes, we need to make sure there's people, making sure that it's to the best of our ability playing inside those boundary lines. But we're going to end up spinning our wheels if we're like, so how do we get it perfect and make sure we fully understand? First of all, it's moving so fast, there's not enough hours in your lifetime 1,000 times over to try and make sense of this stuff. And so I just think it's really important. And this research, I would highly encourage anybody to actually go take the time to look at it. It really was fascinating to dig into it, but you have to dig into it with the right perspective, because you could look at this and it could completely freak you the heck out. You might completely just panic and go, oh my gosh, AI is lying to us. It's doing all this stuff. There's nothing we can do. It's just getting ahead of us. And in some ways, yes, that's true, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I mean, it can. Now, the other thing is too, is this chain of thought only gets worse in terms of its ability to explain things the more complicated and the more advanced we put the AI on. So again, this goes back to, as people are in decision-making roles of where do we put AI? Just recognize the more complex, the more multifaceted, the more advanced types of things you're asking AI to do autonomously, the more likely it is to do this stuff and not be transparent with how it does. So the more clear you need to be on the parameters, the more clear you need to be on the outcomes. I mean, all this stuff, because again, it will find ways to exploit it and it will do whatever it takes to get to the finish line. Whatever it takes. And you're probably not going to be able to figure out how or why. And auditing it is darn near impossible. I mean, it works in these highly systematized environments, research environments, where the whole purpose of it is to study it. Because you might listen to this whole thing and go, oh yeah, well, if it's so hard, how did they do research on it? Well, yeah, that's in a closed research environment where that is the whole purpose of the exercise. You think about a large corporation where you're just letting AI loose. Are you kidding? There's not teams of researchers following this stuff, making sure that everything is, up to code and all this other stuff. So of course it's going to get lost in the noise. So if nothing else, more reason to be thoughtful, to be intentional, to be really careful in what you do. And if you need help with it, this is why I tell people all the time, look, I'm not always just trying to pitch my wares. I'm trying to say, you need help thinking through these things, because there's corners you're not thinking around. There's things you're not considering. There's risks you're not anticipating. And AI will just continue to exploit that if you are not careful.